Yeah, in the last couple videos, we put together a character, and image, and a background tile. So we're ready to bring those into our game. And not quite the final version yet. Right now, just looking at the images and stuff. And very, very soon after this quick start series on the 2D and 3D images, we'll come back and adjust this to some nice, proper, reusable objects. So for right now, just the quick start of getting into it. So I'm going to go back to the test version and the test 2D version. Open that up with Notepad. And so here's where we left off. Oh, whoops. I left a line in there from preparing, from the prep time here. So we imported PyGame, initialized our stuff, and then set up the main aspects of our semi-infinite loop, and then a graceful shutdown. I guess there's one more line that should have gone in here right before clock.tick. I was just saving it until we were doing images. So, not the final version. We're going to come back and do do a tutorial or two about setting up some game objects more formally later. This is just a quick start on the image stuff, so we can just load them in. So I'm going to create a reference called player, and before I create player, I want to create player sprite, so the image for our character. So player sprite is, we have a PyGame engine has this object called image, which has a method called load. And then what sprite do we want to load? Well, we have one over in the images folder, a thing called character.thing. And I'll go ahead and put it here because we're going to want to do this eventually. Our player, we're definitely going to want to have collisions and stuff going on. So once we have that image, we can get the rectangle outline from it and use that for our collisions. So might as well show that here because that definitely goes right along with our basic sprite. So we can just call, I'll just call it player rect and get the rectangle outline from it. And that'll be the player sprite reference we just created, which is a PyGame image. And from that we can call the get rect method, which will bring the borders of it. Don't necessarily need that in this case. I just wanted to go ahead and include that. And to call it, I'm just going to create a function here. We're going to do this in objects properly before too long. So a player and some XY coordinate for the player to go at. And to bring it up, then to show it, this one's just going to show it on the screen. We'll have, we call this method from our scene called blit, B-L-I-T. That stands for block transfer. So everything in PyGame is considered a surface. That's the term they use. And block transfer, it very rapidly moves one surface onto another as a large block. So that's what we use to draw stuff, basically. So what do we want to draw? We want to draw a player sprite, and we want it at these XY coordinates that are passed in. And I mentioned earlier, in PyGame, anytime we have more than one number expected, go ahead and assume it is going to be coming in as a tuple. So an immutable list, to signify a tuple instead of a list, we use parentheses to create it. So that'll be the XY value we pass in. And to make sure that the rectangle is always with that, I like to go ahead, even on a small test like this, go ahead and set that player rect.x attribute to the x we passed in, and likewise assign the player rect y attribute that y we passed in, just to make sure those are always together. So that gets our player there. And then we can just come down in our loop and draw that by calling that method. So we'll call the player method. To start with, I'm just going to pass in some random values, 123, 234. And, well, that's the instructions to draw it, but we haven't actually given the instruction to constantly update things. So to do that, we just need to call this method that is built into our scene, or built into PyGame. So PyGame.display.flip. And that just means update the graphics. That's the method to update the graphics. So just like the clock speed, that needs to be set kind of at last thing every time. So we do make all the changes in our loop, the next update frame of the game, and then we flip over to the next frame. So that should be enough to show this. So let's give this a quick test. Open up PowerShell here. And I need this directory I'm in. Control copy. And, well, if we need to change a directory in PowerShell, we have set location. But PowerShell isn't update on command prompt. So if you know the old Windows command prompt instructions, the old commands do work. We can just do CD for change directory or the new set location. They didn't delete any of the old instructions. They upgraded and improved them. So now from this directory, we can run that test. Run test2.py. Uh-oh. Oh, whoops. That was supposed to be test2. There we go. And we see our character showing up. So that's the first thing. So let's put the background in now. Oh, and might as well, while we're here, where did the code go? And we also have an SVG with the same name. So I'll go ahead and run this real quick. And you can see it brought it in, but it brought it in really small. But obviously we can resize that. And when we resize scalable vector graphics, we don't lose any clarity when we stretch them and shrink them. But for now, I'm just going to work with the ping image. And now we can do the same thing for a background. So I'll call it ground sprite equals pygame.image.load. From the images folder, we have that grass.ping file. And I don't expect to have any collisions with the ground, so I'm going to skip the rectangle part, but if those go together, but we'll be looking at a proper image thing in a little while. So now we can just create a function to quickly show that the same way. I'll call it ground, pass in an XY coordinate, and all we need to do is call our scene that we created earlier, the PyGame display, as a .flip method, which is block transfer, and we want to rapidly transfer ground sprite to those XY coordinates we pass in. And that'll be enough for that one. And so by default, PyGame will layer them in the order we draw them. So if we draw ground before player, player will be drawn on top of ground. So let's do that here. I'll add a couple lines, and well, I want to tile that whole surface. If we just did one, it would only show up in just one little pixel, and we want to cover that whole background. So I'm just going to do that in a quick for loop. So for I in the range 0 to 768. And our pixels were 64 by 64, so a step size of 64. That'll get our rows. And for j in range 0 to 512, which when we get to writing that, obviously it's going to be the size of our game. Again, a step size of 64. Well, for each one of those, we're just going to call that ground sprite and draw it, make I and J our XY coordinates. And that should fill up that background nicely. There we go. So you can see those tiles lined up, gave us some grass area, put the image on there. So there's the quick start. I guess to finish up the quick start, let's go ahead and do the WASD keys and move our character. Well, we'll do that later. Let's do the images first. I'm trying to get sidetracked. So that's our concepts for loading those in. And after we do the quick start on 3D images, we'll come back and do a proper set up a proper, nice formalized class to make our objects in the games reusable. Actually, a hierarchy of classes. That way they all interact together nicely and we're all set up to make it reusable. I guess we could go ahead and add this to the writer because that's going to happen every time. Oh, I forgot to hit copy. So copy that line and come over here to the game writer. Notepad++. And I know that's going to happen every time right before the clock. So I'm going to go to the main loop section. Right before I add in the clock, I want to add in that line, which is inside of the while loop, so it'll have one layer of indenting on it. So I know that's going to happen right before the clock every time, so I can go ahead and add that to the list so that when we write the file, our images are ready to update. Probably could have done that in the first one. I just figured I'd wait until we were working with images. And so there's loading those in, and we'll do the same thing with 3D models, and then we'll come back and do some basic movement on both 2D and 3D, the WASD keys to move them around, and then we'll start formalizing them into objects. So I will see you in the next tutorial, and we'll do the same stuff we just did with the 3D models and load those into our 3D game. The quick start version, not the final objects yet. See you then.